Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world today. And welcome to another episode of the Realist Lens for researchers who keep it real. As a theory driven approach, program theory, realist evaluation, and synthesis are paramount. However, for PhD students or researchers, it's not always the easiest to grapple with. From building to refining to testing, many different interrelated components can make it challenging. There is also a lot of different terminology: program theory, substantive theory, middle range theory. So, how do you go on to build a program theory? What are the challenges? How does it evolve through time? And in today's episode, we ask these questions with someone very special. And we have to congratulate her today because the first paper of PhD has been published, and which is Zoe McCormack. Zoe, lovely to see you. Congratulations. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really good. Thank you.
Brilliant. No, thanks to you for coming. I know in a very special day. Would you like to share a little bit around your study and what's been published?
Yes, so just before we started chatting, my paper was published, my first paper of my PhD, which was a realist review looking at mental health education initiatives for health profession students. So it was quite a broad paper, just looking at all different ways that other institutions around the world have different ways that they've come up with to, improve like mental health literacy, empathy, using all different types of educational approaches, creative methods, bringing in people with lived experience to do a kind of patient education sessions, clinical placements, and volunteering, and all like a whole wide range of different ways that we can bring different ways to bring in mental health education, the different impacts that that can have, and I suppose I was developing my program theory around what are the ways that provide the most impact for mental health education and for, improving mental health literacy, empathy, all of these different things. So I kind of ended up with three kind of main program theories around that. And yeah, so it was a long process. Like that was a 2-year realist review. I don't know how long it takes people normally to do a realist review, but that's how long it took me. So yeah, so I'm really happy that that was published today as well.
How exciting. I can't wait to read it, Zoe, on those three program theories and how you went through that process. Just before we go into the um in into that area of the episode talking around program theory, would you just share a little bit more about yourself and your area of study, which of course you've mentioned a little bit in that paper, but just more generally speaking, would you like to introduce yourself and your work in realism?
Yeah, so I am a third year PhD student. I'm in the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and I'm in the School of Pharmacy and Biomolecular Sciences. So my PhD is all about looking at mental health education for health profession students. I'm particularly kind of looking at mental health first aid. That's something that has been introduced here in the School of Pharmacy as a mandatory requirement for all pharmacy students for the last 7 years. So part of my PhD work is evaluating that and seeing how much impact that has had, but then also looking at, widening that out. So we've brought in mental health first aid to medicine students as well as an options for first and second year medicine students. So also evaluating kind of how that's gone for them. So the first part of my PhD research was the realist review, just looking at all different types of educational approaches and kind of using that program theory that we came up with there to kind of see what we need to do with mental health first aid, whether it needs to be changed or adapted. Um, Actually, what we've really found is that um, little things like where you place something in a curriculum, or like whether you use video or resources or whatever you do there, that doesn't really matter so much. That actually just being able to have like repeated experiences and being able to meet lots of different people with lived experiences and hear their stories and hear from them directly. It's actually those things that matter the most. Um, and have just being able to have those experiences really require a kind of large institutional relationships with other hospitals, other clinics, and community groups, all of these different things to provide those experiences for students. So Our final piece then will be we're going to introduce an eating disorder education program for students because the mental health first aid program in Ireland it includes depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance abuse, but doesn't actually talk about eating disorders. And that was something that has come up within in a couple of studies that students really want, and that is missing. So we're going to then do a realist evaluation then using our program theories that we've developed and evaluate the eating disorder program. So that's kind of my PhD.
Wow, sorry, that's fantastic, and so much going on, and in so many different areas, and the interrelation of education and health and mental health, and with students, and it's so complex, which of course, from a realist perspective, is perfect. I was intrigued as you were talking about mental health first aid Ireland because, of course, in the UK we have MHFA, mental health first aid as
Yeah.
well, and people do their mental health first aid qualification, etc., which I've done actually as well, and I found that really interesting. Is that a similar process that you're talking around in that perspective?
So mental health first aid in Ireland, I know we follow very much the Australian program. So mental health first aid originated in Australia. We followed their program very much, pretty much exact.
Mm,
So we haven't separated it from there. The way it's done here is that it's all licensed through Mental Health First Aid Ireland is like a I suppose, an organization. And so they manage the licensing of mental health first aid. So you would receive, um, you just receive your mental health first aid certificate through that. And that's a certificate then that you can bring into your workplace or wherever you're going. We don't tend to have like levels of certification. We have kind of adult mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, and then there would be offerings, say, in more like corporate workplace settings that you can do like maybe small like hour or 2 hour courses on different kind of mental health related topics. But generally, so for like our university setting here, we offer adult mental health first aid, which is a 12-hour program. You have to complete all of that, and then you're kind of licensed then with your certificate. One thing I suppose we've noticed here is that, you know, sometimes we've had to offer it differently. So you might be kind of doing it over a week rather than the kind of like 2 day, 6 hour days that might be standard kind of generally. So we've often had to kind of run it slightly differently. But yeah, so we would when I'm evaluating the adult 12-hour course.
brilliant. Thanks, Zoe. And that's really interesting to hear around the differences and similarities because, of course, yeah, I think the one in the UK also was based from mental health first aid in
Mm.
Australia. But listeners may be thinking, okay, that's really interesting, but what is this relevant to program theory? And in fact, it is indeed relevant to program theory because when we're trying to build this program theory, we're trying to understand the program as well as we can and the program architecture and everything that's surrounding the program from the different components and what's involved and the actors that are involved and interventions that are involved in order to get this explanation. But I guess that many people come in here and are thinking, what is a program theory in the first place? Because it's something that we speak around a lot in realist work. For you, Zoe, what does program theory mean in realist terms?
So for me, I think the way I needed to think about it was basically just like what are all of the active components that make mental health education for health profession students work best? So what are the things that like what are the kind of different factors that maybe like the facilitators of like really like strong outcomes in empathy, mental health literacy, knowledge, confidence, and what are all of the things that kind of contribute towards that? But then what are also the things that might be a barrier to that? And so really I started developing program theory around this thing. So really for me, like thinking about like what are the outcomes here? What are all of the possible outcomes? And so a kind of we ended up with program theory, some that were like positive and then some that, could be negative also. So you kind of have a really good understanding of, what are the active components of this education, and what is really contributing towards those end outcomes.
That's so interesting when you're talking around, the active components and the contributions and I guess also how they interrelate and interact, right? In those
Mm,
configurations and in that domino effect, right? How is it that they're all in this complex mental health education landscape? How is it that sometimes it works or indeed doesn't work, depending on the
yeah.
different components linking together in this sense? So that's really useful, this initial explanation and identifying those active components, identifying what is going on, in the
Mm,
most basic terms. And when it comes to the program theory per se, or to the program that we're speaking about, but you mentioned so many components, right? You have the actors, you have we mentioned earlier in our conversation around you have the curriculum as well. You have the different
mhm.
people that are delivering this curriculum. So I guess the program theory could become huge very quickly. And how do you go on to build your own program theory? You've identified all these things. It could be massive, but of course you have to keep it feasible within your project as well.
Yeah.
So how did you go about building your own program theories?
So with my realist review, the first thing I did was, you're trying to, with your realist review, you first need your initial program theory. So my method for doing that was to bring in a stakeholder group. So I knew that there was different, academics that had kind of been doing work in this area that I think would have really interesting insights into kind of how to build an initial program theory in this area. We also had people with lived experience. So I had people who, maybe were mental health first aid instructors, but also had like the lived experience piece as well. And that their insights would be really, really beneficial in terms of like what are the things that they feel are important when they're delivering education. I also had some health profession students, undergraduate students on my stakeholder group, so I could get a sense of them, of, just their experiences of being a health profession student, and so that they could kind of tell me what are the things that are important to them as learners. Um, and then I also had some student welfare staff as well. So I engaged with the student welfare team here in the Royal College of Surgeons and just got a sense from them as well, just their perspective of working in the mental health area and working in particular with undergraduate health profession students and kind of what they felt was important. So I first, for the initial program theory, I did individual interviews with all of these different stakeholders. And then I would have went through a process then of kind of looking through those transcripts and then bringing out kind of all of the things that they felt were important and building the initial program theory around that. So I think I ended up then with kind of 5 areas. So within my initial program theory, there was lots of conversations around like the logistics of developing mental health education and like the timing that you do it. Do you do it in their first year? Do you do it in their final year? If you do it in their final year, then they're kind of prepared for practice. But then if if you're doing it in the first year, then maybe they'll see this as actually really important for their career. And if you're like waiting, does it kind of give the message that mental health education is less important than other things? With loads of conversations around, does it need to be mandatory? Does it need to be an elective? Um, and then we had loads of conversations around like the philosophy of the education. So thinking about, are you bringing in people with lived experience? Are you doing like simulation with like, actors? And just kind of what is the actual education philosophy in terms of what you're trying to achieve with it? I suppose depending on who I spoke to, different people kind of had different outcomes in mind as to what they wanted to see. Some people were really focused on like the personal benefits of mental health education for students, or some others were more focused on like the professional development aspect of mental health education. So we had loads of discussions around this. There was also a really big conversation around developing like that safe learning environment when you're teaching mental health education, and that being aware that actually there could be people in the room that have their own experiences, and how do you kind of develop a safe, like psychologically safe learning environment. And then learner characteristics was something that came up. So where kind of your own motivation to learn mental health, and that some people might be more motivated than others. And, especially thinking about the environment that we have here in Royal College of Surgeons, up to 70% of our students are not from Ireland. They're coming from another country to study here. And actually, like, there's a kind of cultural aspect of mental health that we need to think about, where people are coming from, different cultural values around mental health. So that all kind of developed my initial program theory. And so then I would have used that to guide my search strategy. So when I was searching for articles in my Realist review, I was focusing on these aspects, and I was trying to draw out all of these different theories and initial program theories that my stakeholders had given me together. So that was kind of my initial program theory. It was very much guided by my stakeholders. And I would have used that then to guide my literature searching. So when it came then to kind of trying to develop my own the program theory, I was using then like the literature, and if I had kind of identified these factors within the literature. And to be honest, I think most of the stuff came up except for like learner characteristics was a really, really strong piece within my program theory of that, you could really see that um you know, your gender, your cultural background, if you have personal experience or any kind of exposure to mental health, that the outcomes of the education was far more effective. So learner characteristics was a really strong part of my program theory. And I think if I hadn't talked to stakeholders and figured that out, I don't know if I would have been able to kind of draw that out as obviously by myself, because it definitely was something that I wasn't aware of. So that was definitely something that was really, really strong. Another aspect as well was being able that exposure to people with lived experience. So one of my main, like nearly every article, I think over 50% of the articles were focused on PPI educator, so a patient or someone who had lived experience going in and talking to students about their lived experience. And there was a lot of articles that focused on that. And that seemed to be really effective for all students, regardless of their background, whether someone had like their own lived experience or not, or their cultural background, gender, whatever it was. Being able to listen to someone's story and hear their perspective seemed to be kind of the most effective way of developing empathy in particular, but also developing a kind of mental health literacy, and being able to see how their mental health literacy can apply to different situations. Being able to meet people with different lived experiences as well was also a really key component. So I think like how I developed my program theory, it was absolutely like my foundation of my theory was guided by those stakeholder discussions. And then kind of using those discussions to guide how I kind of fed, um, how I kind of looked at the literature and like what I was taking out, and then kind of bringing it all together. Like I had lots of times where I was just on a big whiteboard with all different themes and trying to kind of bring stuff together and see where the kind of outliers are, where are the commonalities, and really just trying to find like that pattern within the literature, which I think like probably took the most time. Lots of me just by myself, just trying to figure out all of the different pieces of the literature, and going back to kind of my research team, having discussions, going back again. And then I kind of finished up with a big stakeholder meeting. So I kind of brought everyone together, and I kind of went through then. I had five different kind of main themes. So I had written out like all of my five main themes into like if then because statements. Um, and I rewrote them then as vignettes. So I kind of had, Brian goes to his lecture, he's listening to someone with lived experience. And, he kind of thinks about like his ideas that he had before about people with addiction, and now is kind of thinking a little bit differently about addiction. So every statement was kind of written out like that with Brian and what, his experience of the education. And we had discussions around them. And then I was able then to break those five theories down into kind of three main program theories, and that was what we ended up with at the end. So lots of different discussions, me just trying to think of different creative ways to think about all of the patterns that was coming up. And really like, that stakeholder group were like my absolute like core of how I was going to find my way through. I think being aware of the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you don't have. Like I'm not a health professional, so I've never been a health profession student. I've never, I've never experienced a lot of the different ways that they learn. So being able to have those students to hand, have all of the people who are involved in education in different ways, really supported me to really develop these theories so that they had meaning for them and made sense to everybody. So that you're kind of, you're talking their language as well.
So I absolutely love this conversation that you just have because what you've just demonstrated, I guess, is one of the key things of realist research, which is every program has, in the words of Pawson, is theory incarnate. And, there's a theory that it's embedded within each program. And a lot of the time it's implicit and we kind of do our programs and that's about it. But would you just explain this, just bringing that to the surface, showing the cards into exactly what is going on? In this program that you're evaluating, which I think is fascinating into the detail that you've gone through and all the individuals going through similar processes to really understand the programs in that. And I guess the key of stakeholders is absolutely essential at all processes. And I love one of the ways that I love realist research evaluation and synthesis is exactly how the stakeholders get so much say and direction in the project, right? Because all these different ideas and thoughts and discussions and disagreements sometimes are going to shape those program theories as you go through. And I want to ask you about that actually, because you have all this feedback from stakeholders, you have all this data that is coming from the literature, and you have this initial program theory, so like this prototype, right? This initial prototype of explanations, of hunches, of what we think is going on here, like the iPhone 13, and then all of a sudden you have your program theory, the iPhone 14, the refined version, the one that after all that information, all that data you have used to refine those areas. Now, the question that I have there is that feedback from stakeholders, from the literature, from initial program theory to program theory, how did all that information help you shape your theory?
I think it really helped me think about what is the most important parts of this. So, like, and there were definitely things that weren't included in the kind of program theory that we ended up with. So like things like logistics, like that just didn't come up in the literature at all. And, it's not that it's not important, but I think it's just something, with any realist review and with your program theories, there's always going to be stuff that you really want to find, and it's just not talked about. It's just not discussed in the way that we want to find it. And it's not that it's not there. It's just, I think when we're trying to find stuff in a realist review, we're trying to find stuff that's already been published, and it can be really difficult to find everything that our stakeholders are talking about and what's important to them. So really, what we found in our program theory was that it's not that logistics aren't important. It's more that repeated opportunities are the most important thing, and it doesn't really matter how you go about that. It's just making sure that that happens. So I think when you have your kind of prototype of your initial program theory can really kind of help you just kind of lay out like what are all of these important factors to all of these different people. And I'm sure for kind of other projects, there's lots of different kind of actors within your topic area, and lots of different, approaches that you need to kind of think about. So being able to kind of bring all of that together within, an initial program theory can really just help you identify like what are the important things that I need to try and discover within this literature and really just kind of like frame your way of thinking. Like that thing around like learner characteristics, it's just not something that I think I would have thought about if I hadn't have had that initial discussion with um with stakeholders. I just don't think I would have been thinking in that way. And because I was thinking in that way, I was able to draw out that stuff from the articles that I was reading. And, that became like a really kind of core piece of all of each program theory was really kind of under like, is it's program theory, but with those learner characteristics in mind. And that when you have those things in mind, you can increase the kind of you know, the mental health literacy, the empathy, the outcomes that you're going to have within the education.
Thanks, Zoe. And I guess that one of the key things that you mentioned here, which are so important as well from a realist review, is the fact that the information can come from so many sources, right? You have your stakeholder, your literature, your grey sources, that all helps to build this explanations, this program theory, moving it from prototype to the refined version. And as you look back, I mean, you've just published your first paper today from the PhD and the realist review, and you came up with three program theories. I'm sure there were some challenges along the way, or some areas where it was more difficult than others, or some revisions that you had to do iteratively. So, would you be able to share some of those biggest challenges that you found within this process of going and building your own program theory within your PhD?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge was, I was like the topic was very broad. So we had like a lot of, I think it was over 300 articles that were initially for full text extraction. And I was, I think the biggest challenge, first of all, was just trying to narrow down our topic as much as we could. So that there was a manageable amount of articles to read. Like at the end of the day, you are on a PhD, you have limited time, and you need to be able to, have a manageable amount of articles to screen, and also just, not overloading yourself with so much information. It's manageable to be able to kind of start extracting the important parts of each article. So the first challenge I think was narrowing that down and figuring out a way to narrow it down in the most kind of I suppose just rigorous way that you could. So that was the first challenge. And then, I kind of ended up then with 76 articles for full text inclusion that I had included. And then just thinking about these 76 articles and, what is the story that these articles are telling me? Like what is the story, and how do I kind of extract out the important parts of all of these stories without kind of diminishing the importance of what each article is saying. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge for me, especially it's my first time kind of leading a review process. It's your first, my first time kind of doing a whole review by like, obviously with my supervisors, my research team, but as a PhD student, I think it's your first time to kind of be making these decisions. And that's kind of like one of the biggest challenges. So for me, it was really kind of trying to figure out that story. So um, really just spending that time to kind of familiarize yourself, reading and rereading articles. And just, I think being patient with yourself as well. It's also your first time doing a realist project. So you're thinking about things in a different way. For me, I just spent a lot of time like throughout the whole like realist review process. I would have like read, okay, I have to go with stakeholders. So I'll be reading up on like realist interview techniques, reading up on like just the next step of the realist project that I had to do. And I really just kind of, was familiarizing myself with the realist method as I went along. And just being kind of, comfortable with the fact that I don't know everything about realism yet. And, I'm not completely familiar with all of the different ways that you can do realism and all of the different kind of jargon and everything. But I know what I need to know for the next step, and just being really comfortable with that. And, just being comfortable. Yeah, I don't know everything about realism, but I'm just learning as I go along. A PhD is a learning process, and like just being comfortable with the fact that it's a learning process, and I only know as much as I can know for the next steps that I'm doing. And I just really took it like that, and just allowed myself to learn as well.
I love that, Zoe. Thank you so much. And reminding everyone around the nature and purpose of the PhD, about the learning and the growth and the embracing of that sometimes, challenges and mistakes will happen along the way, and we'll certainly learn from those and to develop those ideas. And I think something that a lot of people relate to is that scope that you mentioned, that drawing a line in the sand at some point.
Mhm.
I always think of our PhD projects as a little grain of sand in the Sahara Desert. So when we're looking at the project and zooming out and seeing what is feasible, but also what we can do with rigor and transparency, that becomes some of the big questions that we have in our project. So thank you for reminding us of that. People will be listening to this and they will be going afterwards to their day-to-day jobs, day-to-day research, and they'll be on their commute wherever they are listening to this podcast, and they will then go out and do something, um, whatever that is. When it comes to their program theory, I'd love to hear, sorry, around your practical tips, your three top things for individuals to go on and build their own program theories. So if they're either starting with their initial program theory or refining it or just the process, what would be the top three things that you would say to someone if they're starting their program theories, developing them, just generally speaking, the three top things you would say?
I think my first top tip is speaking to the people who know the things that you don't know yet. So we all have our own kind of knowledge that we have around our topic area and like whatever has drawn us to our topic area. But thinking about what knowledge don't I have, or what knowledge does the research team not have? So I had like pharmacists, like academic pharmacists on my research team, but we didn't have, pharmacy students on the team. It would have been a long time since any of my supervisors would have been a pharmacy student. So that was really important for us that we involved pharmacy students and like health profession students within our stakeholder team. And we were able to kind of draw on their knowledge of their experiences of being a student now as well. Especially thinking about mental health, like, our approach to it and how we think about mental health has changed a lot within the last, 10, 15 years. So having students that were students now was really, really crucial for us. So I think, if you're thinking about your topic area, thinking about what are the things that I don't know about my topic and where can I get that knowledge from? Who can I kind of invite into the project? And, like I think I did like my stakeholder engagement was quite a formal process of bringing people together. I had like a strategy for like doing realist, theory gleaning interviews and all of that kind of thing. But I think it doesn't have to be a formal process. It can just be a very informal process for kind of getting that knowledge as well. So, depending on kind of, what resources you have for kind of bringing people in, whether it is a formal process or an informal process. So kind of thinking about who you might bring in, who might have that knowledge that the research team doesn't currently have. I think it can really help develop, really meaningful program theories at the end, because ultimately, like, we have our publications and all, but ultimately we want our research to be meaningful and understandable to the people that, it impacts. So, thinking of ways that we can do that. I think another tip is to really just take it easy as well. Like, I very much felt like when I was doing my realist review, like, don't ask me anything about realist evaluation because I don't know that stuff yet. I'm just focusing on realist synthesis and what I need to know for this. Um, so yeah, just being really, really patient with yourself. I think there's a lot of terminology within realism that can be quite alienating. And I think being patient with yourself, using whatever tools you have to understand the realist kind of method, the realist approach. There's great courses like Justin Jagosh's course. I went on his kind of developing excellent program theory course, and that like really, really helped my process. And thinking of how I'm going to approach my realist synthesis and how I'm going to do it. So kind of making use of, the realist experts that we do have. Um, and, the different kind of, even listening to this podcast, maybe there's particular episodes on a particular area that you're struggling with, have a listen, maybe reach out to that person who has been speaking on the podcast. There's great kind of resources. We have the PhD Realist network, which is just, a really informal place where you can just have a chat about the things you're struggling with. Sometimes it's even nice to just have a laugh about not understanding something. And that can just make you feel a lot better, that you're not the only person out there. So, thinking about kind of reaching out to people and just taking everything kind of one step at a time.
So, stakeholder involvement, step by step, and use the resources.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Three things to end with there for anyone listening. And thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation and hearing you speak so passionately about your topic around your subject and really just emphasizing how when we bring our program theories or explanations at the surface of the project rather than in the background, it does help to understand what is going on a little bit more to provide an answer to the what works for whom, how, and in what context. Um, Thank you so much for your time, Zoe, and thank you everyone for listening. I've had a fantastic time having a conversation, and I will see you in the next episode. And Zoe, I'm sure we'll speak again. Congratulations
Yeah.
again for your paper. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time, and I'll
you.
speak to you soon.
Thank you.